fastest train back to London is 2048, so which is just absolutely crazy. So I might have to rejig the schedule here. But firstly, I'd just like to thank everybody. It's an amazing turnout, really impressive. My name is Sheila Coleman. I'm the Northwest Region Coordinator for the community branches of Unite the Union, and I was pleased when I was asked to chair this, because community has played a large part in a lot of the initiatives where people are actually taking action against all these awful cuts. I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight, because it is an amazing turnout. People come out at their own time, their leisure time, which isn't great these days. And I think it's really important that we see here a diverse group of people on the platform, and I think that says a lot. I think it's a tribute to some of the newer activists who are involved in the campaigns around the region, that they have brought fresh life into stale old politicos, and I suppose I count myself amongst them, so I'm not insulting anyone. It is really good, and I'd like to thank people for coming out here tonight. In particular, I would like to thank Andrea Wall-Turner, because she came back. She went to the People's Assembly in London, and people were encouraged to go away and form People's Assemblies within the region, and she came back and took it to heart and has hounded us all to get this together, and fair play to her. She's actually a great person to work with, and all the other people around Andrea. I'll just introduce you to the people here tonight, just generally so you know who they are. Starting from the right, Lawrence Clark is a comedian, actor and writer. And very proud citizen of this city, so we're proud to have him. He is also here tonight representing DPAC, Disabled People Against the Cuts. Next to him is Steve Turner, and I had Steve Turner down as the Executive Director of Policy for Unite the Union. However, I'm going to stick my neck out and say welcome to the new Assistant General Secretary of Unite, albeit waiting for formalisation, but I reckon if I say it, they can't take it back off him. And congratulations to Steve. I'd just like to say that he came straight from the interview, straight here, and he is at the moment Executive Director of Policy for Unite the Union. Next to me is Colette Williams, and Colette is the Regional Coordinator of BARAC, which stands for Black Activists Rising Against the Cuts. She is also the chair of Manchester Unite Community Branch, and she is a great chair, and I really enjoy working with Colette. On my immediate left is Owen Jones, who is, you probably know Owen, he's an author, a journalist at The Independent, and of today, an otter fancier, and you'll understand that it's a Twitter reference to a typo from Owen, whereby people here now think he's obsessed with otters, which I think is quite funny. Next to Owen is Mark Steele, who again you probably know. He is a comedian, author and broadcaster, and someone who I listen to a lot on the radio. And next to Mark is Martin Kelsey, who is from PCS. He's the Northwest Regional Committee Chair of PCS. In the audience tonight as the Regional Secretary of PCS, and together with Mick Whitley, Regional Secretary of Unite, I would just like to say that we're housed in the same building, and I think it's a really healthy relationship we have, and I personally really enjoy working alongside PCS. So before I introduce people, I would just like to say, as I say, it's a great diverse platform. We're here tonight because of the hard times that we're enduring, some people more than others, but I always say those of us who are lucky to be in employment are only a paycheck away from being in the same position as those people who aren't working and are subject to all the awful things like bedroom tax. The hard times we're having are forcing people to mobilise, to resist the changes and the cuts, and to mobilise around the diverse issues ranging from urban decay, young people who have never had a job and are unlikely in the foreseeable future to be in paid employment, and the whole issue of internships and workfare and 0% contracts are a whole issue we need to campaign against. The fracking debate, bedroom tax, welfare reforms and social injustices generally, which I think over the past year have seen people move. People here probably know me in relation to the Hills for Justice campaign, and next week is the anniversary, the first anniversary since the publication of the Hillsborough Report, which basically put out and established what we in this city had been saying for 24 years, that it was a major cover-up. And so that, the cover-up of that scale, I think, goes to heart of social injustices and shows the society that we're living in. The need to re-engage with the public is crucial, and people here tonight, I think, are acknowledging that by their presence. There's a great need to build a powerful movement to challenge the minority who seek to remove our rights and are trying very hard to do that. But in order to build that movement, we need to engage in meaningful dialogue. It's crucial, but we have to exert and maintain a sustained pressure and present a united front in the face of the decimation of our communities. And I think that's the message we need to take away from here tonight, is that the idea that unity is strength. And let's do our arguing, but let's do it behind closed doors and go out there fighting united. So I'd like to begin by welcoming Steve Turner and asking him to open the People's Assembly of Merseyside. He was on first, but also as well he does have a train to catch back later. And I just would like to welcome Steve and have Steve open it, because Steve was at the forefront of the Unite Community Initiative, and a lot of the campaigns that are ongoing at the moment have actually come about in basically have been sustained and maintained because of Unite providing resources, whether it be people or photocopying, to get people out onto the streets at demonstrations. So please welcome Steve Turner.
Okay, well, thanks Sheila, thanks for them words, and wow, do I love Liverpool. I mean, just take a look behind you. Standing room only at the Adelphi, who would have thought that? But what a fantastic turnout, and so many young people. And it just reminds me of a few years ago when we were sitting around discussing how we were going to deal with the crisis while students and young people were being kettled on Westminster Bridge. You know, and that said something about the trade union movement. We were sitting down at Congress House discussing the minutes of the last meeting while people were actually out there on the streets demonstrating and fighting back against their cuts. So fantastic to see so many people, particularly so many young people. And I just want to start by thanking all of those that have done the hard work really in organising tonight's People's Assembly. And that is Sheila, it is Andrea, and I know Andrea was mentioned earlier, but it's all those good community comrades from the CASA and the Liverpool community branch, and I want to pay a big tribute. I heard that PCS were in the house earlier, so I don't know whether Unite are in the house, but you ought to shout out if you are. So, colleagues, well, there's a few of us here, anyway. I do bring solidarity greetings from Unite, from Unite's Executive Council, and indeed from the chair of our executive, whose home city is, of course, Liverpool, Tony Woodhouse, and Len McCluskey, our General Secretary, whose home city is also, of course, Liverpool. Both of those can't be with us tonight. They were on my interview panel earlier that Sheila referenced before, and they're still stuck in London doing business. So unfortunately they can't be here, but they'd have loved to have been here, of course, giving support to such a fantastic initiative. And I'm so proud to be here, not just on behalf of Unite, but also also as the chair of the National People's Assembly. We had a fantastic National Assembly in London. Over 4,000 people came together to not just listen to people speak, and that's why I want to keep this a bit short tonight. We've got a large panel, but to listen to other people, to listen to you, to build an organisation that you can take back into your communities, to start organising on the ground, talking to people, knocking doors, getting people angry, making people confident, giving them the confidence to stand up and fight back against some of the most vicious cuts that we've seen probably in 100 years. I don't know about a generation. This ideologically driven government is hell-bent on trying to destroy just about everything that we fought so hard to deliver for our people, for our kids, for the next generation over so many years. So the People's Assembly is a coalition. It's a coalition. Sheila made the point about leaving what we disagree with outside and bringing into the all what we can agree to do as a group. And that's really important. The People's Assembly came from the idea that we needed to get together. We needed to unite. We needed to build the broadest possible coalition if we were to fight back against the Tories, the Lib Dems and all of those others, including many in Labour, of course, that not only started some of this crap but would like to continue it moving forward. So wherever they came from, we needed to pull ourselves together into one coordinated movement to stand proudly standing up for all of those people that can't stand up for themselves, as well as our own families and our communities. So that's been a very short time span, really, since we first initiated the People's Assembly to the point where People's Assemblies are meeting everywhere. From Bristol to Glasgow, from Plymouth to Hull, from Norwich and Ipswich and London through to Liverpool and in Manchester, of course. There are People's Assemblies in villages and towns and cities across our nation, and that's a fantastic tribute to the confidence and the will of ordinary decent men and women, young and old, that are prepared to not just put up or shut up, but stand up. And that's what's really important for our cause. So it is about common purpose. It is about removing the most vicious government that we've seen in about 100 years, standing up for the vulnerable, the sick and the disabled, those that are in work and those that, of course, are not in work, our youth and our elderly that are looking for a bit of dignity following a lifetime in work in retirement. And what are we up against? Probably Eton's finest, the Bullingdon Brigade. Ideologically driven. There are political choices to be made in life. And what they're doing now is making choices. Of course, their choices are not in the interest of any of us, not in the interest of the working classes. I mean, their only interest is in looking after themselves. So this is an ideological drive to destroy right now, if we let them get away with it, to destroy everything that we hold so dearly. Our NHS, free education, our welfare state, our communities, the very fabric of our society. And it was Bevan when the NHS was formed that didn't only say that Tories are vermin, and he was right on that as well, by the way, but he said that the NHS will only be with us. Will only be with us for as long as we're prepared to fight for it. And that's the reality that we face today. We have no God-given right to the NHS, to the vote, certainly not to free education for all, not to a home, not a social home anyway. The things that we take for granted now, that are now being taken away from us so viciously, of course, people fought hard for. They fought hard for. My parents and my grandparents, looking around the room, a lot of great-grandparents perhaps as well, fought hard. They fought to defeat the evils of fascism in the 40s. And when they came back, they fought to build a better society. They weren't going back to the poverty and the destitution and the homelessness, the helplessness of the 1920s and the 1930s. They came back and they fought. It didn't just happen. Nobody's given us anything in life. They organised. They won an election, but they won an election with a bold, radical, proud, stand-up manifesto. And it was for homes. It was for NHS. It was for free education. It was for a welfare state, pensions and dignity in retirement. And that's what's under attack right now. Colleagues, they organised in society as well, and in their workplaces. They organised into trade unions. They built a shop stewards movement, second to none, a movement we can rightly be proud of today. They struck for progress, decent pay, shorter hours, pensions, safe workplaces, equal treatment for all. And when they fought for a reduced working week, it weren't for 0 hours. 0 hours, where'd that come from? 8 million people, I don't know about the 250,000 that the state seem to think are working 0 hours, or even the 1 million that they revised it to within about 20 minutes of making the announcement. The reality is in this country there are some 8 million workers, 8 million workers, 50% of under 30-year-olds that know no different than a 0 hours or a short hours contract. And the insecurity, the poverty, the vulnerability, the desperation, the fear that brings. On call, getting called to work on a mobile phone with the first one that picks up the phone or answers the email, getting a job. That's the reality for 50% of our under 30s right now. What a disgrace. What an outrageous disgrace in the 7th richest nation on this planet. Not only are 1 million unemployed, but the 50% that are in work have no real work. So colleagues, when they fought for that, and they fought landlords and loan sharks, and they fought eviction, and they fought poverty, and they fought squalor, and they won, they did that for us. We inherit their struggle. And what's happening now is the Tories are ratcheting back the clock. At the first opportunity that they've had to do it, Thatcher didn't go as far as Cameron and his cronies will go. And if they're elected next time round, God help us. God help us, we will be on the street. I hope we're on the streets before that, by the way. But if we ain't on the streets following it, God help us. Now we see them on the attack, using a crisis not of our making. There weren't any nurses or dinner ladies or school crossing patrol people that were gambling with billions of pounds on stock markets, creating a crisis. It was the spivs and the speculators. And what have they done? Not only continue to reward themselves, but just this year on bonuses, just this year, they had the audacity, the cheek, to delay the payment of their bonuses by 3 weeks so that they could benefit from Osborne's 5% tax cut. Now, if that ain't tax avoidance, I don't know what is. They deliberately delayed millions of pounds worth of bonuses just to get a 5% tax hike back to their pocket. 65 million quid that cost us. 65 million quid. And we've already written as a union to the Public Accounts Committee and the Revenue and Customs to demand an immediate investigation into the criminal offence of tax avoidance, because we think that's exactly what they've done. Well, colleagues, none of this is going to happen, not on our watch. Not on my watch. Not on your watch. We're even on the TUC agenda. I came to the TUC General Council this morning, preparing for Congress down in sunny Bournemouth next week. And there's a motion. There's a motion on the agenda. I don't know whether they read it, but there is a motion on the agenda that calls for Congress support for the People's Assembly Day of Action on the 5th of November. And that will get unanimous support at Congress. It's already got the support of the General Council. Now, I don't know whether they know that the People's Assembly's Day of Action on the 5th of November is a call for mass protest and civil disobedience or not. But that's exactly what it is. And of course, it's on our agenda because public disobedience and civil disorder wins. We can't have all our fights industrially. We can't save the NHS by simply balloting our members in the NHS. It's my NHS. It's my kids' NHS. It's my unemployed neighbours' NHS and all. If we can't build communities to support our NHS, we won't win the battle for our NHS. Which is why the People's Assembly and movements like this are so important. And if necessary, remember the lessons of the suffragettes. of the Chartists before them, and of the civil rights movement. Direct actions, civil disobedience and protest won those battles. And if we need to fight to make this country ungovernable, then that's exactly what we have to do if we're going to defend those institutions that we see as being so vital to our future. Colleagues, if we don't, we'll have no NHS. We'll have no welfare state. We'll have class cleansing in our cities. Not just because of the benefit cap and the bedroom tax, but it takes a Tory, doesn't it? It takes a Tory to bring in ATOS. From a government that couldn't give a toss. Only they could afford that one up, couldn't they? Right? They don't use our NHS. That's the reality of it. They don't use our NHS. They go private. They don't use our schools. They go private. They don't rely on our pensions because they got millions. You've got a cabinet sitting there, 21 of them are multi-millionaires. They don't rely on our welfare state because they've got millions. So colleagues, the fight is on. And I just want to leave you with a few words about our values. Never forget the values that brought our communities together, to hold our communities together. Fairness and justice, dignity and respect, camaraderie and solidarity. They're the values that built Britain. We're the people that built Britain. So stand up, colleagues. Stand up for our nurses and our teachers. Stand up for our labourers, our students. Stand up for all those people that can't stand up for themselves. Because when you stand up together, you fight back together. And when you fight back together, you win. Solidarity, comrades.
Thank you, Steve, for that rousing speech. Before I introduce the next speaker, I meant to say at the beginning, you should have slips of paper if you want to submit a subject that you want to speak on for a couple of minutes. You have them. Oh, no, okay, we've changed that plan. You now put your hand up with the piece of paper and people will collect them, not now, but soon. And then we will just have to randomly pick people out of a hat because of the volume of people here. Also, aside from the platform speakers, we have speakers from the floor. Again, we are allotting 10 minutes maximum to speakers to give everybody a fair chance, and so there can be contributions from the floor. The next speaker I would like to invite from the floor is Dr. Alex Scott Samuel, who is from Keep Our NHS Public Merseyside. Thank you.
Sorry.
Alex, the site's not good. So.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, sir. Are you?
If it's easier, yeah. Thanks. Thanks, Sheila. Thanks for the speech. Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm really delighted to be here tonight to talk about the health service. As Sheila said, I've known Sheila for a long time, so it's great to be talking alongside her. Also alongside Steve Turner, because I'm a Unite member, as well as British Medical Association, but you can imagine which union means the most to me. I have to say that I'm speaking in a personal capacity because I sometimes get into trouble with my employer for not saying that. I'm a public health doctor, and I've been a public health doctor in Liverpool for 40 years this month, so I really have seen everything come and go is very much the word tonight. I was also a co-founder of Keep Our NHS Public 10 years ago. I'm a very active member of our steering group nationally as well as locally. Back in '97, I was one of 50 doctors who signed a letter to the Daily Mirror saying, vote Labour and save the NHS. And then 6 years later, we were forming Keep Our NHS Public because of all the privatisation. It does seem that Labour are kind of back on the side of the angels, at least Andy Burnham is. Oh, so for God's sake, Ed, don't replace him at the next reshuffle. Sorry, I know that's slightly controversial, but that's what I do. Okay, I'm going to say a few words first about the national situation and then concentrate on the local situation. You all know about the Health and Social Care Act, and Steve has already talked about the disastrous situation in the NHS. I've just finished writing a paper. I'm an academic researcher, and I've just finished with some colleagues writing a paper about the impact of Thatcherism on health and well-being in Britain, and we all know what that impact was. But what was really sickening was being reminded not just of the things that we all remember that Thatcher did to our welfare state, but of the way that her and her cronies, Sherman and Ridley and Joseph, plotted, even before the 1979 election, plotted the downfall of the trade unions and how they would break up working class solidarity. And it really is sickening to be actively reminded of that, as I've just been, you know, immersing oneself in all that horrible stuff. Although everything that's going on now in the health service is a direct descendant of all that. Back in the 80s, people like Letwin and Willits and Redwood were plotting to break up the NHS. Letwin wrote a book called Privatising the World in 1987, and there's a chapter in that about how to persuade an unwilling electorate to go along with the marketisation of public services. And every single thing in that chapter Lansley did in misleading the public into thinking that what was being done to the NHS, and sickeningly misleading the media and the BBC in particular, was all about putting GPs in the driving seat and all that, what we doctors call a load of bollocks. So as I say, watching Lansley and Hunt follow on from those people has been absolutely sickening. What is the NHS now? Since April the 1st, as Steve implied, it's simply a brand name. It's a brand name for a contracting operation which puts out contracts, and it puts them out mostly to the private sector. In fact, one of the first things that they did in setting up their new NHS was to advertise a £96,000 a year post called Head of NHS Brand. Isn't that an obscene waste of our money? Yeah, anyway, so as I say, basically practically everything is being put out to contract, and in the wonderful website called nhsforsale.info this week, we were made aware that of the first 25 contracts awarded since April the 1st, since all this went public, 21 of them, in other words, over 80% were given to the private sector, to the Tories' private sector friends. The biggest of those being £1 billion in Cambridge, but much, much bigger contracts are on the way. And every contract that is given to the private sector will mean that our taxpayers' money is hemorrhaging into their shareholders' pockets. So that's what's being done to the NHS, privatisation on a massive scale and just being turned into a meaningless logo. You can imagine that quality issues are very much to the fore. And just to give you a couple of examples of some of the awful things that have been happening, the totally inappropriately named company Harmony took over the GP out-of-hours service in a number of areas areas of the country. And in Hackney last year, there was a very well publicised death of a newborn baby as a result of that company's negligence. And what is even more sickening is that the GPs in Hackney had decided sensibly that they wanted once again to run the out-of-hours service and had put in a perfectly adequate bid, which was turned down for purely ideological reasons, and the contract re-awarded to Harmony, and that was one of the results of it. Another dreadful example of the sort of things happening all the time in the NHS at the moment concerns Carillion. Many of you know that name already, and you'll hear me mention it again. In their so-called Surgery Centre in Stevenage in Hertfordshire last year, there were 3 unnecessary deaths following routine operations as a result of clinical negligence, and Carillion had their licence withdrawn from them, and the contract has been given back to the NHS. Don't forget that name, Carillion. I'm going to mention it in a minute or two. In fact, I'm going to mention it now because I'm going to move on to local issues, and the one big local issue for Keep Our NHS Public, and if you've not looked at the leaflets on your seats, do look at our stall on the side here, is the PFI build of the Royal Liverpool Hospital, which is being given the go-ahead by the government and is going to the planning committee in Liverpool this month. I'm actually putting in a personal objection to the planning application on aesthetic grounds. Everyone else who knows much more than me is doing all this stuff about how wasteful and unaffordable it is. If you've looked at any of the pictures, and there's one on our leaflet, you can't fail to see how ugly it is. Everybody thinks that the existing Royal is unattractive. Well, they're going to replace the unattractive Royal by what, in my view, will be perhaps the ugliest building in Liverpool. Real 1960s brutalism. And I was at a very interesting meeting yesterday at my place of work, where a very senior architect revealed that, in fact, they chose from 3 different designs, and they chose, in his view, the least attractive of them for no obvious reason. So it was nice to hear an architect confirming my thoughts about that. But as well as being ugly, what it really is most of all, like many PFI projects, is unaffordable and wasteful. The Panorama programme last year showed how, and the Public Accounts Committee, how they fiddled the figures to get it approved, and the cost of it to the health budget is way over that of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in London, which has had so many problems with affordability. So it's completely unaffordable. Even though, as a result of our judicial review and our objections and campaigning, 200 million of wasted private interest has been cut off the interest because they've been forced to rethink, and the Department of Health and the European Investment Bank have put money into it, whereas previously it was purely going to be a massively expensive private loan. But even so, the first 4 million every year for the next 30 years of the health budget, 130 nurses worth, will be wasted on excess private interest costs. So the Royal PFI can still be resisted, and we very much encourage you to do so. But the third thing about the Royal is Carillion. I've mentioned them already in relation to their clinical negligence in Stevenage. In addition, there's a well-documented case in Swindon where a Carillion PFI hospital, where the workers at that hospital, in particular low-salaried Asian women, were racially abused, bullied and victimised. and that is the company to whom we're giving the running of the Royal. In addition, many of you will know that they were part of a national blacklisting operation, and many construction workers, including from all parts of Merseyside, were blacklisted by Carillion, and that was only revealed a couple of years ago in what a professor at King's College London called the worst example of human rights abuse in the employment sector for 50 years. That is who the Royal have chosen to give their contract to. I've got 1 minute left, but fortunately I'm at the end of what I'm going to say. Virgin on the Wirral are full of conflicts of interest, so I should just get that in as well. It's not only in Liverpool that these problems exist. The clinical director of Wirral CCG is in the pockets of Virgin. His health centre was built by them. But I must also mention the disaster, very briefly, Sheila, of SSP, another bunch of cowboys who have taken over 20 practices in Liverpool, including our beloved Prince's Park Health Centre, once set up by the great Cyril Taylor, formerly of Liverpool Council. Been absolutely terrible to see the queues outside Prince's Park, because like the other SSP practices, they're all understaffed, and there are lots of quality problems. The nurses don't have proper identification, and it really reminds me of when I was a houseman, an intern back in 1972 at the Northern Hospital, the Boundary Street GPs. There was a bunch of shop fronts in Boundary Street in Vauxhall where people used to queue outside to see these dreadful GPs who used to send half their patients to me at the casualty department with these notes, scribbled notes saying, "Dear doctor, please see and advise," i.e. I am completely useless and I've no idea what's wrong with this patient. Well, that's what SSP are taking us back to. It's absolutely sickening. Please get involved with Keep Our NHS Public. Please attend the demo on the 29th in Manchester for the NHS. Great to talk.
Thank you very much, Alex, and I just think, you know, the sterling work Keep Our NHS Public does, particularly on Merseyside. People like Alex and Greg Dropkin and Sam Semoff deserve all our thanks for the work they continue to put in. I'm moving people up and down the list because of trains, so move rapidly up the list. I'd like next to welcome comedian, author and broadcaster Mark Steele. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much. I'm delighted but also relieved that there's such a brilliant turnout tonight here in Liverpool, because we're trying to build a national movement of the argumentative, the disobedient and the stroppy. So if we can't get a big crowd in Liverpool, we're stuffed for anywhere else. There's a number of things to be stroppy about that might occur to you. This government has been on a mission since it came in. A mission, first of all, if you remember, to tell us that we were in an unprecedented amount of debt. Never before in the world has there been so much debt. Debt. This was, they couldn't be asked anything without answering, but we're in so much debt. And they would come out with all these statistics and figures to prove it. We now owe £20 for every insect in Britain, or some such thing, and people would believe it. Look at the debt that we're in. And then the next move that they made was to convince us who it was who had to pay back this debt, because who it is, after all, it seems, who's got all the money in this country, it's the poor. The poor have got all the
money. They've got more money. This is mainstream economics now. I'm sure if you go to A-level economics, they teach you this. That it's now mainstream. The poor have got more money than the rich. They're the people with all the money, and we've got to get some of it back off them. The rich can't afford it, and it's not their fault, after all, that we're in all this debt. The bankers, it can't be them. They haven't got anything to do with it. It was the poor that were gambling it. It was the firefighters. They'd come back from putting a fire out, and then they'd gamble 50 billion quid on the yen and ruined the economy. People lying on trolleys in hospitals. These are the people who should be punished. These were the ones getting up when they were out of their coma and wasting 50 billion pounds. It's only right, therefore, good and proper, that it's the poor that should be punished for this. It's almost as if that's their attitude. That the rich can't even aspire to gallivant around like the poor can, wandering around like the girls in Sex and the City, going down to Poundland for a dishcloth in ways that the rich could only aspire to. And so there is a method then for how the country has to be rearranged in order to get the money back off all the poor people who have stolen it while the rich are struggling doing 2 jobs, delivering pizzas in the evening to make ends meet. And the method is that everybody has to pay for everything themselves. All the things that Steve was talking about that we communally fought for, or rather our parents and previous generations did, now that has to go. We can't... It was a little frightening, wasn't it? That was a bit Malcolm X from my point of view. Are we all right? I'll try and carry on and keep calm. I may have been panic on the train going home. Some sort of post-traumatic stress situation. The poor. The poor have to pay, and one of the ways we have to pay is that we can't afford, it seems that we are so poor now as a country, we can't afford the things that we could afford 100 years ago. Libraries, stuff like that were built in the 20s with such civic pride. Now we can't afford them. Maybe we could afford them then, but not now, because we're in so much debt. And it's encouraged this whole mentality that you just pay for your little thing, as if the whole country is being run by Ryanair now. You just pay for your little thing. I don't want to pay for a library. I don't take any books out. You pay for your own book. I'm not paying for your books. Everything's like that. Education. I don't want to be educated. If you want to be educated, pay for it yourself. Nothing to do with me. Lampposts soon, I reckon. They'll have little meters in. You'll put 5p in and a little bit of light will come on, just enough to get to the next one. Because why should I pay for someone else's light? I've got to torch you by your own bulb. Nothing to do with me. Everything is about that. It's encouraging the worst sort of selfishness. The people who go through life like that. I don't want to pay for the fire service. I'm not on fire. Why should I pay for it? You pay for it. Nothing to do with me. Look at all the money that gets wasted on guide dogs. I can't climb a tree. Nobody buys me a gibbon. Nothing to do with me. This is why it was quite surprising, you might think, that Ian Duncan Smith was on the television today, because they talk about waste. You know, this is the big thing as well that they're talking about. There's waste. If you're asked how a local authority can survive now with its latest round of £20 billion of cuts or whatever, they say, well, look at all the waste, and they come out with something that they have probably made up about how the council wasted 100 quid on something or other, as if this is what it's all to do with. Now, Ian Duncan Smith, it seems, and his department have set up this system to try and change the tax, to try and change the whole benefit system to something they call universal tax credit. And the National Audit Office, the government's own institution, has discovered that, apart from anything else, it's wasted £34 million on a computer system that Ian Duncan Smith was warned wouldn't work. He took no notice, and so he's on the television. Now, given that they are so obsessed with waste, I would have thought that he would have been on the television and on the radio all day today going, look at how much waste I've created. I'm disgusting. The sooner I'm privatised, the better. How could we possibly allow people like me to waste public funds. I'm just a drain on the public purse. I can't be afforded. I should be sent back to another country somewhere. Something along those lines. But instead, he persisted by saying that this was all going to be fine, and it was all going to be fine because the whole reason for all this is that we have to make a situation. We can no longer tolerate a situation where when you go to work, you get less money than when you're on benefits, than when you're unemployed. Except that, according to the Department of Works and Pensions, his department's own figures, there is no single case that they can find where if you go to work, you are going to be getting less money than if you remained on benefits. So this entire scheme is invented to solve a problem that doesn't exist. Similarly, they have been talking for some years now about the problem of 3 generations of people in houses where none of them have worked. And so a study was done, the Roundtree Federation did a study where they tried to find out how many people this applied to, and there was not one family. So all of this screaming, all the times that they come on the television and the radio and they scream about how we can't possibly carry on tolerating these 3 generations of people, well, we don't have to because there isn't any. It's all to solve a problem that doesn't work, that doesn't exist. You might as well build a huge institution to solve the problem of marauding giant squirrels. There aren't any. It doesn't exist. And similarly, immigration, we can't allow them to come over here milking our benefits. And their own department has the figures that say that whereas 6.6% of immigrants claim benefits, 16.6% of non-immigrants claim benefits. So therefore, if you're really obsessed with making a bigger proportion of the country not claiming benefits, bring more immigrants in. And of course it makes sense. Because there is a flaw in the logic that says all these people coming over here, they're just sponges and lazy, these people who have walked across Africa and rowed from Morocco to Spain and walked across and managed to row again across the channel. They're lazy, those people, you know. They've got no initiative. They're not the sort of people we want here. And so, in order to try and to stop these mythical creatures that they create, we have the extraordinary vision of vans with anti-immigrant slogans plastered on them, going around inner cities saying, if you know of anyone who's here illegally, then report them, send them home. Utterly fascistic nonsense, horrible things that they're doing. And they're not completely crazy, these people that do it. They do it because they want us to blame each other, because while we're blaming each other, we're not blaming the people. Stuff that I know one of the many fine things about this city is that you don't read The Sun. If you were to take a look at the Daily Mail, I have to write a newspaper column every week where I'm asked to try and take the piss out of the more ludicrous, ridiculous things that are said in defence of the Conservative ideology. And I'm very grateful to the Daily Mail because every week they never let you down. They always come up with something. And they are quite clear who it is to blame. They're quite clear, they know it is. So you will see every week there will be at least one story will be in there about a woman on a housing estate and she's got 225 kids and every single one of them's on benefits and now they've bought a giraffe and the giraffe's on benefits and they complain to the council because the house isn't tall enough and the giraffe's getting a crick neck, so they've put them up in St Paul's Cathedral. Some of the kids have said they've got compulsive snooker syndrome, but they can't afford a snooker table, so they got one off the town hall, but the mum can't be referee because he's allergic to white gloves, so the mayor has to come round and count all the points up, otherwise he'll be arrested by Europe. And on and on and on. It's nonsense. And then it turns out it was actually the journalist just had a dream, wouldn't lie, but he had food poisoning. But and that's what he dreamt of, but it doesn't matter because this is the sort of thing that's going on, and all the while they miss the people who are really taking vast pots of money, the Bob Diamonds, these sorts of people, these people who are head of Barclays taking £8 million just for one bonus. This is after the crash, for such a, God knows what it would have been if he hadn't caused an economic meltdown across the entire globe, but this is the sort of thing, and at the moment, are they curbing these sorts of people? Here's one or two clues that Bob Diamond said quite recently: the period of remorse and apology for bankers must now be over. He's standing up for them at last, these downtrodden, beleaguered people, at last, because it's, with bankers lately, it's just been remorse, apology. At last, that period has to be over. The Daily Telegraph reported a couple of weeks ago, the front page, Cameron admits defeat over bankers' bonuses. God, and he put up such a fight, didn't he? He put up such a fight. Unlike the presumably now, with people on benefits, now the same thing will happen. He'll meet them over lunch, they'll explain that they can't really live on the amount that they're getting, and he'll admit defeat over that as well. David Bulk, is that a name? Donald Bulk, sorry, a man called BCC Partners, a board of BCC Partners, said, if you're upset about bonuses and think they aren't fair, then get over it. Life isn't fair. And of course it's for magnificent fiscal economic insight such as that we pay these people such vast amounts of money. And so on it goes. And yet there is, I'll have to try and hurry up here, there is one other thing that is very sad about all this. Not that millions of people are angry about this, but there seems to be a sense of people, what can we do about it? It's an ideology that they're selling, an ideology that we can only run a world in this way, with everybody paying for their own little thing, with the rich really getting everything and us getting less and less and nothing communal. And so many people want to oppose it, and yet it doesn't seem to be a forum for doing that. And how much easier it would be if the Labour Party didn't have their strategy, which seems to be, the Tories are disliked, according to a poll they are still the most disliked party in Britain, and the head of the Labour Party seems to have a strategy of, well, in that case, we'll try and copy them. For us, and then you can dislike us instead. It's not a strategy. I'm not really very good at elections myself, I don't think, but I can't see that working. I can't see this being the idea that they're going to infuse people by saying, well, we're not going to repeal any of the cuts that are going to be made by the Conservatives. Of course, if they were to offer some sort of alternative strategy to that, it would make people feel that there was so much more, but they're not going to. At the moment. We can change that, I think. And what we can change is the idea that anything can be done about it. And I think the People's Assembly has already done that. Tens of thousands of people have been part of this movement already. And it's a tremendous movement. And it's a movement because of one thing. See, one thing that people talk about when they say, are you going to have any impact? Certainly the official politics will say, you've got to win over the middle ground. You can't get anywhere unless you win over the middle ground. And to an extent that's true. But what it doesn't say is that the middle ground can shift. That what can seem extremist one day can seem moderate the next day. When you think 20 years ago, if you supported the idea of gay marriage, you would be labelled an extremist. Now you're an extremist if you oppose the idea of gay marriage. It has become something that is utterly sensible. How ridiculous those politicians seemed a few weeks ago when they were saying things like, no, it's not British, we can't have it. I mean, after all, I'm in a heterosexual marriage and it cheapens that if there are gays can get married at all, which I find an extraordinary thing that if gays can do it, it can't say, well, gays can eat. No, I haven't eaten a thing. Now that I know that lesbians can eat as well, it just ruins my dinner. Extraordinary. They seem like the extremists that they are. And so they will on everything else as well. Of course they will. There will come a time, as long as we make it the case, there will come a time when people will look back on this period and say, who on earth thought that it was the poor that should pay for the crisis that was created by the bankers? Who on earth thought it was a good idea to sell off the National Health Service? Who on earth thought that this would be a sensible thing to do? They're the extremists, the people who are chucking people, the poorest people, out of their houses for having the audacity to have an extra room that isn't occupied all day long. That is absolutely extremist, nonsense, radical thing to do, and that will be seen as the extremist thing, and what we are saying will be seen as the perfectly decent, reasonable, moderate thing, because we can change society, and no city knows more than that. Liverpool. Just two brilliant reasons why I think it's that's the case. But look, I remember sort of being here many years ago for the Liverpool Dockers, and even though they lost, the inspiration that they created around the country was extraordinary. And secondly, the enormous battle that had been waged against the most ridiculous, horrible odds by the most awful of people over Hillsborough. And if people hadn't fought with such tenacity, they would have got away with it completely. And that hasn't happened, and that's because people from this city have fought, and I ask you to do the same for them.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark, for that. And very quickly like to introduce you to our next speaker. And in the same vein, I'd just like to personally thank Owen Jones, because Owen, whenever he was on a radio programme or anything with Calvin Mackenzie, will text or ring up and go, what do you want me to say to him, or what do you want me to do?
Liverpool, you're never going to disappoint, will you? Just want to say firstly, just spare a moment for Mark here. Poor bloke, he's had to listen to me babble repeatedly as we traipsed up and down the country, city after city. And one thing he'll notice I always do is, however cynically, milk the most tenuous local link to the city I'm speaking in. I don't know, my aunt's pet goose once flew past or something. I am proud to say that my dad was born and grew up in this great city. So I'm going to alienate... Wait a minute. I'm going to alienate half of you because he's an Evertonian. I was going to say... Oh! It went down well. Not very many bees. My brother's a Liverpool fan though, so I'm triangulating. It's a pretty Blairite thing to do. Friends, I just want to say this. I want to start, and not just because of the chair, because of course the city, but also because of the lesson it gives us. And it's, as Mark just so wonderfully talked about, that campaign for justice by the families, the survivors of Hillsborough, for truth and justice backed by the brilliant people of this great city. When they started out, of course, these people weren't seasoned campaigners. They were people forced into a fight for truth and justice because their loved ones had gone to a football match and ended up dead. And they were there, these ordinary people, up against the most overwhelming odds, the British establishment, an establishment who smeared them, who disbelieved them and obstructed them at every turn. A quarter of a century of fighting, of never giving up. And I know the struggle goes on, we have truth, but we don't have justice yet. But what an inspiration to all of us, that working class people from Liverpool can stand up against the British establishment and win. That is a source of inspiration for us all. And justice for the 96. Now, I'm going to do something which might surprise you. It might make some of you raise a few eyebrows, but I'm going to hand it to this government. I'm going to praise this government because they've set us a challenge. They've asked us this: how far can they push us? How far can they provoke us? How far can they attack us before we stand up for ourselves? Before we refuse to take it? Before we push back? Let's just think of the provocations they've set us. The longest fall in living standards since Queen Victoria sat on the throne of this country. The 1 million families a month forced into the arms of legal loan sharks. country's booming industry, food banks. The fact that we have, as charities show, people choosing between heating their homes and feeding their kids. School meals being cut back on. This is the 7th richest country on the face of the earth. And apparently we can no longer afford to feed our poorest children. What a damning indictment of Cameron's Britain. Let's think briefly about other provocations. The selling off of our National Health Service, to the vultures who are currently circling. Think of the slashing of support for working people and unemployed people. The humiliation, the degrading treatment of disabled people forced through the national scandal that is Atos. Their support stripped away, forcing them into misery and despair. The bedroom tax, one of the most outrageous and unjust policies inflicted by a government on its own people for generations. Whether it be the 1 million young people, the million young people at the moment out of work, sending in CV after CV and not even getting a response. The 5 million people languishing on social housing waiting lists. The social cleansing of inner city Britain. The 6.5 million people looking for full-time work who can't get it. Such provocation, such attack, such assault. And of course the government know that's not going to be met with silence. No wonder then, this week they rammed through Parliament the so-called lobbying bill, in reality a gagging bill, to silence campaigners, unions and anyone else speaking out and exposing this government. Now, the other thing they've done, as Mark spoke about, is they know that people are angry. So what they've done is to try and turn the anger away from those who plunged this country into this mess. The bankers, the rich, the people at the top, away from them, to people's neighbours down the streets. The working poor against the unemployed, non-disabled against disabled, private sector against public sector, those living here against immigrants. They get people to turn on each other. If you're low paid, your boss is cutting your wages, the Tories cutting your tax credits, turn on the scrounger next door. You're in the private sector, a supermarket worker, your pension stripped away. Who do they want you to hate? The nurse's pension is still intact. And then we end up with a sight of public money being splashed out on vans with National Front mottos from the 1980s. How low can they get? How low? Friends, this is where we come in. All the gains, all the rights that we have, they were fought for with such struggle and sacrifice by our fathers and mothers and grandmothers and grandfathers. And friends, given they were fought for with such courage, determination and sacrifice, it is not for us to give it all away. That is why we must fight back. It means doing this. This is what's so important. Because all of you will know, many of you better than I, there's no shortage of anger. There's no shortage of fear, but there's one thing missing, and that's hope. And it was Harvey Milk in the 1970s, a crusading civil rights fighter, who said this: I know you cannot live on hope alone, but without it life is not worth living. And the point is this: it doesn't matter how angry people get, it doesn't matter how scared, if they don't have hope, they don't fight back. They get resigned, they yell at the TV, their anger's turned on their neighbours, but they end up resigned. And that is what we have to do. That's what the People's Assembly has to do. It has to give people hope. And I just want to talk quickly, it has to be quick because I'm going to miss the train, talk about how we give people hope. We have to give people a coherent alternative, because this idea there is no alternative has been rammed into people's heads ever since this government came to power. So let's say this: people have every right to be furious about the £24 billion being wasted on a housing benefit each year. But let's say this: that's not lining the pockets of tenants, it's lining the pockets of private landlords charging extortionate rents. Because governments won't build housing. So we say this: as well as controlling rents, let councils build housing, creating jobs, stimulating provide for millions, but let's be honest, they're a subsidy for low pay because bosses aren't paying their workers properly. So we should demand, no ifs, no buts, a living wage. So anybody who works can actually be able to actually support themselves and their children. The lack of jobs, the fact we've got hundreds of people chasing vacancies across the country. Let's have a strategy like they've got in Germany, where the state intervenes to create hundreds of thousands of renewable energy jobs, taking on the environmental and the jobs crisis at the same time. Let's talk about the banks. Our friends, we bail out the banks, but we nationalise the debt and privatise the profit. So let's demand that we, the people who bailed them out, have proper control over those banks, have a public investment bank to rebuild our economy. And let's talk about tax justice. We hear about benefit fraud every single day it exists. It's worth less than 1% of total social security spending, 1.2 billion a year. Compare that to £25 billion lost because the people at the top taking the mick will not pay their taxes. So we demand this. We demand this. The law is changed with no ifs and no buts. Whoever you are, you will pay your taxes. We make that clear. Now friends, this is where the People's Assembly comes in. Because as I say, everything we have was fought for throughout history, whether it be the Chartists or the suffragettes or those who fought racism or those who fought for women's rights. People often demonised and reviled and ignored in their time, spat at in the streets, in prison. These are the people who built this country and built all the rights we have. And those are our traditions. Those are the traditions in which we stand. And it was Frederick Douglass, an African-American statesman, who said in the 19th century, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and it never will. And that is the truth. It's all of us linking together, all of us who are affected, not being picked off one by one, not having our struggles in isolation, linking them together. That's what the People's Assembly is doing. So on Saturday, I know there's going to be a national campaign against legal loan sharks, putting on the agenda the squeeze in living standards. I hope as many people as possible can make that in Liverpool. We have the 29th of September where we're going to give a very, very northern welcome to the Tories. Then we have the cheek to remain Manchester. And we have the 5th of November too, standing in this proud tradition of this country of peaceful civil disobedience. Let's look at other struggles like UK Uncut, which put tax avoidance on the agenda, like the poll tax movement, which didn't just take on the poll tax, that helped kick Margaret Thatcher out of number 10 as well. And friends, above all, let's remember this. This isn't just letting off a bit of steam. This isn't just getting it all off our backs. This isn't about noble defeats. We're in this to win. And if we stand together, we fight together, friends, we will win this together. Thank you.
Thank you, because 3 speakers will have to leave us now. Thank you to Steve Turner, to Mark Steele and Owen Jones, 3 extremely powerful speakers. Thank you. got to get through. Next, I would like to ask from the floor, someone who's been at the forefront of the bedroom tax campaign, very much active in Keep Our NHS Public, the bedroom tax campaign, and also Unite Community. Please welcome to the floor Celia Ralph.
of all, I want to say something about what the last speaker said. He said, it's not ours to give away. We didn't give it away. Our leaders give it away. Yeah, the leaders of the Labour Party and the unions gave it away. I fought, like many others, in services for years, and I've seen members of the union fight. I've seen people in the community fight. And there's been no real fight to unite those people against these attacks that after 20 years, the most sacred possession of a working class family is their home. And now they're coming for that. They're coming for that now. Now people might say, oh, the bedroom tax, it's just a bedroom tax. Let me give you some information. 60% of those who claim housing benefits are working. 2/3 are disabled or long-term ill. That could be you. If you get ill or if you fall out of work, it will happen to you. And this is what I'm finding. People are not being told what these policies are until it happens to them. And then they will say, how did this happen? I'll tell you how it happened. How many people, how many politicians, how many councillors have gone out into the communities and told people about these policies, have asked their opinion on these policies, of what it would mean to them? No. They get away with it because they don't tell the people who elect them, they don't tell them exactly how these policies affect them. What I'd like to talk about tonight, I mean, there's been some brilliant speakers here tonight, and I'm in admiration for them. But one of my biggest concerns, having worked for many years in the communities and the unions, is that we've seen the services and the NHS be broken up and privatised, and we've seen the suffering that that's caused. And this is something that is close to my heart and a lot of other people in this room. But when I say that what we need to do is look at things differently. We've had, how many of you, and I'm looking around this room, I've been involved for 30 odd years, and I see a lot of faces, like myself, who've been involved and fought on different issues over that period. And all of those struggles have been really worthwhile struggles. But why has it still happened? I think what's happening now, we've got a difference here. What's emerging is that Unite have launched community branches. Now the unions have got very little power now in industry, but they have got power if they go into the communities. The communities are losing, we're living in threat of losing their homes. They're losing their benefits. We have people coming in with terrible things that are happening, who've had their ESA stopped. And you know, when you lose a benefit, you lose your housing benefit, you lose everything. That's what's happening to our people now. So what can we do about that? I'm saying the unions have to turn to the communities. They have to organise in the communities. They have to defend people in the communities. We need resources. We need rooms to meet. We need leaflets. We need information. Imagine what a movement we could build if the unions turn towards the communities. And don't forget, their members also live in the communities. And every family is affected in one way or another. We have got to build a movement across this country which unites working class people, because they don't want unity. Unity is a threat to them. And we can do that, and we began to do that. I've got the great privilege of being involved in groups in Liverpool, of people who've not been involved before, but what a hell of a gang they are. And this can happen elsewhere. We are fighting daily. We're fighting when people are coming in with all kinds of problems. We had no money. We had to find leaflets, we had to find meeting places, we had to find people to speak at these meetings. So what I'm saying here is, everyone in this room has a responsibility. And you've heard speaker after speaker say that there's these things, the terrible things that have been going on, the destruction of the welfare state, the destruction of the NHS. Who would have believed that they could privatise education? But they've done it. And it's taken them 20 bloody years to do it. And I mean bloody as well. So we in this room have to go home today and we have to say, how can we organise? How can we unite the communities and those in the unions? We can build a movement that, don't forget, the people in the communities are the grandchildren and children of those who fought for the welfare state, of those who fought for the NHS. It's still in them to fight, and they want to fight. And it's up to us to give them that opportunity to do that. So I urge everybody in the union, all the unions, by the way, have got policies opposing the bedroom tax and the cuts in welfare benefits. Now, what's the point of having a policy against the bedroom tax or the cuts in welfare benefits if nothing's done about it? What's the point in that? I've been involved for years and I've seen resolutions get passed around like bits of paper and nothing ever happens. What I'm saying is, we get into those unions and we say, okay, you're against it, what are you going to do? What are you going to do as a union? We want legal advice. We want leaflets, we want meeting places, we want newspapers, we want information to get out into the communities, to inform people. And that's the way we've got to go forward.
We're also shaping the Labour Party.
Can you wait until there's questions, please?
I think that the person is quite right. And anybody who knows me knows I've opposed every single action that the Labour Party's ever taken and will continue to do so. What I'm saying is, I'm not saying take that movement to the Labour Party, although some people might be in the Labour Party who wish to fight in it. That's their choice. But we need a movement that makes leaders accountable to us. And if they don't do what we want them to do, we get rid of them. That's what we want. So all my sympathies are with that person. I, like many others, fought in services and was told, because there was Labour councils in control, to cool it, to wait till the Labour government got in power, or you can't do anything because it's against the law. That's all I've ever heard. I've always defied them, by the way, like many others, and I've carried on regardless, and in some cases I've bloody won. So that's what we've got to do here today. We've got to build, and refer to that alternative. What's that alternative going to be? That alternative is going to be a unity. We have got to set the unions, by the way, if they don't go to the communities, they're not going to develop, because the world's changed. We haven't got industry, but we have got millions of people who want to fight and who want to defend themselves. So what are we going to do about that? So what I'm saying is, all you people in the audience who are in a union, get your union to act on the policies against the welfare cuts and against the bedroom tax. And get some, go into your communities, find out where your groups are, and see and help to develop that group. We've gone on knockers, we knock on doors talking to people, and what we found in one area of Liverpool, in South Liverpool, a lot of the people that we knock on the doors, it doesn't affect them, but they're all against it. All of them are outraged by it.
Celia, start to wind up, please. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, sure, thanks.
So, what I want to leave this meeting tonight, I want people to have an idea in their head about how we build an alternative and how we develop that fight for our children and a future that belongs to us.
across the city. Absolutely brilliant. Can you just bear with us a minute, because our next speaker, we just need to move the table to get Lawrence to the front of the stage. So if you just bear with us, and Steve, can you give us, Murphy, can you give us a hand? Is our next speaker, Lawrence Clark, is a comedian, actor and writer, but is here tonight speaking on behalf of DPAC, Disabled People Against the Cuts. I'm very privileged to have Lawrence here.
Thank you. Well, whenever I speak, I always start by saying, no, I'm not pissed. This is how I talk. If you are struggling to follow what I say, well, tough shit. Not a lot I can do about it, quite frankly. I hope you can't follow me. My wife's always saying I don't communicate with her. I said to her, darling, I'm a comedian. Communication, that's my living. What's lacking in my marriage is not my communication skills. What's lacking is PowerPoint. In fact, I want to have a big screen beside me all day long. Be brilliant, wouldn't it? I could win every argument with just the press of a button. My wife would say, you're at home again tonight. I go, not according to my bar chart. You see how it works? I wake up in the morning all bleary-eyed. She said, you're home to do with us now, just naturally, according to the pie chart. More or less equal spread, darling. She said, I'm never in a bad mood. I said, according to our Outlook calendar, you are. She then called me an elderly retentive bastard. Yeah, she's got a point there, really, hasn't she? She's supposed to say some shitloads of hard point when I talk. Well, I wasn't really sure what to do tonight because, as I marked before, I'm not really a comic that does a lot about the government and cuts because it's just too easy. I like a challenge. It's like shooting fish in the bowl, isn't it? But I do a lot about attitudes towards disabled people. I do think since this government came along, we have definitely seen a hardening of attitudes towards us. Particularly as I do, the big society gets me in that, well, whenever I hear about it, I'm not quite sure where I fit into it. But it doesn't seem to be about empowering people like me with rights to participate, to be included. It seems to be more about us being a passive recipient of care, a recipient of charity. And I think that's how a lot of people still view us. And to it, I want to illustrate that with a little sketch. And the idea from this came about 10 years ago. I was on holiday in South Africa. I was waiting at a bus stop, minding my own business, nodding off, when I heard a jingling sound. When I looked down at the sun hat resting on my lap, someone had thrown coins in it as it passed me by. I thought, bloody hell, I'm in the poorest continent on this planet, and yet I look like the charity case here. I look like the person in need, apparently. Now, some people, quite rightly, I think might have got offended at that. Not me. I'm a stand-up comic. I thought, what a great idea for a comedy sketch. So I went around London with my very own charity collection buckets to test what would be the most ludicrous, preposterous, fake charity causes that the public would give me money for. And boy was this fun. So my first cause was very topical, given our current financial climate. I asked the public to pay off my mortgage. So I was thinking, could someone like me get money on the street to pay off their mortgage? Hands up, who thinks yes, that will work? Who thinks that would be like that gullible? We're grateful. Who's already seen the video on YouTube? Volunteer. Okay, here's what happens. We have some sound. Pay off my mortgage. Pay off my mortgage. Pay off my mortgage. You really don't want to pay off my mortgage. You don't want to do it, really. Just pay off my mortgage. You don't want to do that. I was paying them off. That woman had a five in her hands. Now, I'm kind of hoping, we've got quite a big audience here. Have we got anyone in from a legal profession, say, I don't know, the police? Good. Because I should have known, because collecting money like that is technically against the law unless you are a registered charity. And my mortgage is not a registered charity. Therefore, my next bucket said, please don't put money in here, I will get a criminal record if you do. So, do you think I got money for that one? Yeah. Here we go, let's see what happens. years, but I left it there. Not me. I thought I need to go one step further to test this. I need to go more radical, more extreme, and cause that no one would touch with a barge pole. Therefore, my final bucket says, kill the piggies. Obviously a harder sell, but who thinks they can get money to kill puppies? Who still believes in human nature? Good. How much is that? Down with dogs. Down with puppies. Kill all the dogs. You want to kill the puppies? You bastard! I go with this. I know my are you cripple, are you, some sort? Just a cripple, you can say. I see. We'll see, is that it? I have several balls, yes. I see. Yeah. What? Searching for the PC way to describe me, and the cripple of some sort was the best. And then he gave me £2 to kill puppies. What was he thinking? Anyway, I'm not sure. People do still think we're passive recipient to charity, but we're not. We're people with rights just the same, and we've had our civil rights systematically taken away from us by this government. Disabled people, by our very nature, we cost more money. If we're to have equality of opportunity, we need more things to be in place for us to have that access. And that costs money. That's why we're the hardest hit by these cuts, and that's why we're angry. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Lawrence. Thank you very much. Thank you. Our next speaker, I'd like to invite Martin Kelsey, who is the North West Region Committee Chair of PCS. Thank you, Mark.
Started yet? This thing on? Marvellous. Yeah, thanks everybody for the round of applause. Obviously, after 23 years, I do appreciate Scouse irony. Well, for those of you who don't know me, as you can probably tell from the East Midlands nasal whine, I'm not a Scouser, but as I say, it has been 23 years, came here for 6 months, stayed 23 years, and the turnout we've had today at the meeting and the contributions and the welcome that everybody's had today is probably
as good an indication as ever as to why that's been 23 years well spent. It is a privilege to be here today and have the opportunity to say a few words on behalf of the PCS North West Regional Committee. I'm sure I don't need to explain to everybody here today that the austerity programme, as I'm sure you've heard from a number of speakers today, is one that's not necessary, and we in the PCS know that better than most. We know that there isn't a welfare spending crisis. We know that because we are the National Union of Benefit Clerks, and Mark Steele touched on that point in his contribution earlier on today. And we know what the real reason for the crisis is. It's an income crisis, because we're quite simply not collecting enough in the way of taxes, and we know that because we're the National Union of Tax Inspectors as well. So, generally speaking, we do know of what we speak, and the reality that we face nothing short of an unsolicited and unnecessary attack on the working class. As I think has been said already, it isn't one that anybody needs to particularly embark on. So, leaving aside the fact that the attacks are necessary, particularly here on Merseyside and in the Northwest generally, we are being particularly hard hit. You'll have seen the report that came out, no doubt, yesterday, which indicated that above just about anywhere else in Britain, the northwest of England has been hit hardest by the austerity cuts. And, you know, it's no real surprise that we're getting a bit of particular stick, because, quite frankly, the Tories do have a special piece of bile devoted to us here on Merseyside, and that isn't because we're not far off from the Scottish scenario, where obviously they have more pandas than Tories. They do have a special and historic hatred of this place, and for those people who haven't had the opportunity to do it so far, I do recommend that you pop into the Unite building and see the exhibition about the Liverpool 47 councillors, which gives probably the starkest exposition of how a city can, if it chooses, stand up to the kind of attacks that we're facing here today. And hopefully that's something, a message that isn't lost on the population generally, and I know for a fact it won't be lost on the people of this city. And it doesn't help, to be honest, when the Labour Mayor of Liverpool, a Labour councillor, former, the Labour Mayor of Liverpool, rather than arguing against cuts in essential services, has just asked for the same cuts as everyone else. That isn't really the message that we want to be sending. And it is an outlandish position for the guy in charge in Liverpool to be taken, given the particular social vulnerability of this city. I'm sure you'll all be aware that around 40% of the jobs in this city are jobs in the public sector, so any attacks on the public sector generally has a much higher impact on the people of Liverpool than it does anywhere else. And as well as that, the other 60%, obviously a lot of them are in the service sector, so they rely on those public sector workers spending money in a nice shiny new shopping centre that we have here in Liverpool, and they rely on those public sector workers because there is that knock-on effect on the local economy. But I say disappointingly, I don't think Joe will be going to that Liverpool 47 exposition to perhaps learn a lesson or two, and so maybe the resistance has to come from elsewhere. And before you all think I'm having a go at Joe particularly, I think it's only fair that I say that he isn't out on a limb politically as far as the Labour Party is concerned. They have signed up, as I think has already been observed, to the wholehearted attacks on the ordinary working class that the Tories have launched. The ordinary working class who obviously form their core vote. And amazingly, the strategy of asking not to be stabbed quite so deeply and quite so often hasn't been a rallying cry for people to rush out and vote Labour. But I think there is opposition. There is opposition in the country. It doesn't have to be Her Majesty's loyal opposition, and I think they probably take that title too seriously. It doesn't have to be the opposition in Parliament, because there is opposition up and down the country, and I think here today at the People's Assembly and in similar meetings up and down the country, people are taking that opportunity to say that we want to be part of the real opposition. We want to be part of an organisation that is looking to fight these cuts. And here on Merseyside, there is a particularly proud history of standing up against the establishment, as I think Mark Steele observed a little bit earlier, and everybody has already talked about the fights against the poll tax. People have already talked about the tremendous battle for justice in the Hillsborough case, and I'll probably throw in the 1911 transport strike as well, because I don't think anybody's mentioned that one. Generally speaking, there has been a tremendous history of fighting injustice here in Liverpool, and one thing, I always quote the guy on this, when during the Dockers dispute in the mid-90s, Tony Benn did one of his many visits here during that dispute, and he said that he'd always believed that if there was ever a revolution in this country, it would begin in the city of Liverpool. And I think from that guy, I don't think praise comes much higher than that. And here on Merseyside, people standing together and not bickering about what's the best way to get to Crosby, people genuinely standing together, it gives us the best chance to fight the Tories' vindictive and class-driven austerity plans. And they are vindictive. I mean, a little bit earlier this week, my own union, PCS, as I say, we had to take the local government minister, Eric Pickles, to court over the fact that he wanted to stop his department taking people's union subscriptions out of their wages. It cost a tiny amount of money to do that, but because, as I say, they are petty and vindictive, they decided that that's the route they were going to go down, and we won the case, so it's not wrong. And earlier on, Mark Steele was talking about waste and Ian Duncan Smith, but I think Eric Pickles deserves a little special mention on that score, because the amount of money that it's now cost the taxpayer, that's us by the way, the amount of money it's cost the taxpayer will actually fund our having those subscriptions deducted for the next 300 years. So, well done, Eric. He is unrepentant though, by the way, presumably because it is just our money. So a fight it is, a fight's what we've got, and in that fight, I have to say, there will always be keyboard revolutionaries. There will always be people sitting at their Twitter account or their Facebook account. Don't get me wrong, I like Twitter and Facebook. But there will be people sitting at their Twitter account and Facebook account, and they will be slagging off people in this room who are coming together to try and do a little bit of good. And they'll be slagging them off because they're not doing it the way that they want to do it. We're not doing it the way that other people, these little keyboard revolutionaries, want to do it. And I think that's disappointing. Because if people want to take that approach, then that, I think, is a divisive approach, and it isn't one that's going to benefit the stance that needs to be taken. And if we do want to spend all our time arguing about whether we support the People's Front of Judea or a campaign for a free gallery, the only winners will be the Romans. And on balance, I would venture that that's not something that we want to accomplish here today. So that's the challenge that we face. Well, the challenge that we face is putting aside any petty differences that we might have about the type of structure and organisation that we might want to have in any campaign. Some people will argue we don't need any structure and organisation at all, and that perhaps some form of anarcho-syndicalist collective might be the way forward. But, you know, we need to put those petty differences aside and make sure we're all facing the same way. And whispering softly, I think there will have to be some form of organisation. It doesn't necessarily have to be the dictatorship of the proletariat, but there will need to be some form of organisation. And I'm an unashamed advocate of the old organise, educate and agitate school. I think my school is probably still using flint and slates, but that's one for our regional secretary, who always delights in telling me how old I am. But we will all of us will need to bite the bullet a little bit on how we're going to get things done in the future. But if outfits like the Occupy groups, the NHS campaigners, the Anti-Bedroom Tax Federation, the unions, the pensioners groups, local community groups, charities, and most importantly, the National Union of People who think, hang on a minute, that's not fair, which is quite a big group, I would venture. If all of those people can get together, then I think we can make a hell of a difference. And the People's Assembly can be a big step down the road to making that difference. Now, those people who know me know I don't really understand people. I think they're great, but I don't really understand how they work. But I always fall back on a quote from that great philosopher and poet, Terry Wogan, who once famously said, well, it's not famous yet, but if I say it enough, it will be famous. He always said, because I don't believe in God, I have to believe that people are fundamentally good. And I think that's right. And I think if we can unite those people, and here on Merseyside we've got a better record than most when it comes to uniting those people, we can win. Right? It might be a long haul, and it won't be easy. But if it was easy, they wouldn't call it a struggle. Thanks for listening. Sorry.
Thank you, Martin, and well done on getting Terry Wogan into the conversation. Two quick questions, 2 quick points. One, if you've got, because we are going over time, if people are leaving, the room costs a lot of money, there's no resources. If anyone, anything at all, just put into buckets that people have, boxes at the entrance and at the exits. And also as well, if you have got a subject that you want to raise for a brief 2 minutes, if you could hold that up, Andrea will be coming round with the bucket to put the questions in for them to be drawn out randomly. I'd like to introduce you now to our second to last speaker from Manchester, Colette Williams, who is from Barrack and also the chair of Manchester Unite Community Branch. Thank you, Colette.
I'll have to hold it in my hands. I really didn't want to because I know my hands will start shaking. First of all, I'd like just to say good evening and thanking everybody for coming out this evening. I do want to tell you that I'm not a comedian and I'm not a politician, so don't be expecting any great laughs. But the thing that I am is I am a mother, and with that comes a conviction to make sure that with my last breath that I will fight for my son and his welfare and his well-being for the future. And that's why, thank you. I am from Manchester, and I am part of a coalition called Barrack, which is Black Activists Rising Against Cuts. It was formed in 2010 by a gentleman called Lee Jasper and a lady called Zita Holborn, who is in the PCS. And it was initiated because history has informed us that when resources get scarce, jobs, houses, that racism rises. And we've seen that in the last 2 years. I'm ashamed to say that in Manchester about 2 weeks ago, the NF, the National Front, were actually on our high street. The NF, it was absolutely unbelievable. I can just about stomach the BNP and the UKIP and EDL, but the NF, absolutely incredible. So like I said, I'm from Black Activists Rising Against the Cuts. We were formed in 2010. We are a small group of people. We've got barracks in Scotland, in Manchester, in Bristol and in London, but it takes concerned individuals, trade unionists, community activists to stand up on a platform and talk about how racism and these policies are actually disproportionately impacting on the black community. So we are a small group of people, but we've got really loud voices. The one thing that has become quite prevalent when we go to assemblies and talks is we talk about how these cuts are ideological and in terms of bringing down the welfare state and the NHS and all those kind of things, and we hear about statistics and numbers and the unions work and an alternative and everything else and stuff. But what I want to do tonight is to share with you how the cuts are impacting on individuals, and that individual is myself. I've been made redundant 3 times in 3 years. I've lost 2 jobs because of the cuts. I used to work in the community and voluntary sector, and when those particular community groups lost their funding from central government and local government, I lost my job. And in my last job, I went into the private sector. I got paid £6.19 an hour. They were expecting me to do 30 hours work but only paying me for 20 hours. And also, some days I ended up owing them money because they charged me for the petrol that I was using to go to work. So I left that. It took me about 3 months to leave that job. And during the time that I left my job to the time that I went to go and sign on, it's 6 weeks. And that's because it's not a case of being proud and not wanting to get any benefits, but when you actually go into these places, you're not treated like a human being. You go in and you sit down, the person's on the end of the computer, and they say, right, what's your name, what have you done to look for work? And I'll sit there and I'll look at them until they've looked at me, take the time to look at me, and I'll say, good morning, how are you? I'm fine. I'm a human being. I need to be treated with dignity. You're not treated with dignity at all. So it took me 6 weeks to sign on, and in those 6 weeks I've racked up arrears in my housing arrears. So what happens now is that sometimes in the morning I don't want to get out of my bed for a number of reasons, because I'm depressed, I'm pissed off, I'm low. Sometimes I don't get out of my bed because I've got no food in my cupboard to eat. You know, I make sure my son's fed and he's got food and he goes to school and he's all right. And then sometimes I don't even draw my curtains because the bailiffs are coming round because I've got housing arrears. And that's what it's like being unemployed. And then, you know, you're searching for jobs, but there are no jobs out there. You know, there are cleaning jobs which are part-time, working 12 hours a week. You work 12 hours a week, you're working, you can't get working tax credit, you can't get housing benefit because you're not on income support. Do you know what I mean? You're just going round in a circle, in a circle, in a circle all the time. And it's hard. And then you switch on the television. But I've not got a TV licence because I can't afford one. And you've got idiots like Jeremy Kyle telling me that, you know, I'm paying my taxi so you can stay at home. I don't want to stay at home. I want to be an active person in the community. I want my son to be proud of me, to go, oh, my mum's going out to work, but there's no work. Trust me. I've been looking for work since March the 15th. And then, Jamie Oliver is saying, you can cook dinner, 4-course meal for a tenner. Jamie, I've got a tenner for a week to cook food, you know? A week to cook food. But before, when Owen Jones was talking, he was talking about having hope. And I have hope. I'm a part of Unite the Community, and I have hope. And I do believe that as a community, as a society, as a people, that we will actually defeat this Tory government that's in. That we will actually come together, we will stand together, regardless of their politics that they're doing, trying to divide communities, unemployed against the employed, old against the young, black against the white, disabled against abled people, regardless of all the tricks that they're trying to play. I do see that every time that I come out to places like this and events like this, that we are standing together, that we are coming together, and that together that we go out and we fight against the ideological warfare that is being placed upon us day by day. And really and truly, when I say that that's what I get up for sometimes in the morning, is either to go to a meeting or to write something or to read something. That's what gives me the drive to go on, the determination to go on. And there's just one more thing as well, is that, I'm in a room with I don't know how many people, okay? But, we can count the black people in the struggle on one hand, yeah? And, yes, thank you. And, this is something quite, this is something quite stark, when I go out and speak. And I want to talk about how racism within the country has not only come about because of the cuts. When we look at things like deaths in police custody, when we look at things like exclusions in schools, young black boys being thrown into pupil referral units, things about custodial sentences, all those kind of things, and all that the cuts have done and the austerity programme is all it does is it's actually amplified the problems within the black community. And what we need in the black community is we need to be, no, I wouldn't say that that's what we need. We're just battered, absolutely been smashed. It's amazing that this year we celebrate the 50th anniversary commemoration of Martin Luther King. I Have a Dream. There's 300,000 march on Washington for jobs and justice. Next year we celebrate 70 years of the Pan-African 5th Congress conference that took place in Manchester. And for me as a black person, I will say that I am embarrassed that when I go on marches and campaigns, that the black community is not out there. And as a black person, I think that we do need to do more, but we also need to recognise that as black communities that we're getting battered left, right and centre, and it's very exhausting being black in this country today. And my one last thing, and I know I haven't raised your spirits like I'm supposed to and everything else and stuff, but I wanted to talk about the reality, is that, and this is no exaggeration, the threat of seeing no blacks, no dogs, no Irish in windows, yeah, is something that I live with every day, because I do believe that it's coming back in small dribs and drabs. But I do believe that my neighbours, people like yourselves, will fight the racist, will fight the EDL, will fight UKIP, will fight the BNP. And the biggest racist that we've got to fight is this Tory government. Thank you.
Thank you, Colette. Colette always raises my spirits whenever I'm in a company or she ever speaks anywhere. So she does certainly raise my spirits, and I think her contribution is always very thought-provoking. Our final speaker of the night, likewise, is someone who stood up to the cuts. A Labour councillor refused to toe the party line and vote for the cuts, and was suspended for his actions. So please welcome from the floor Kevin Bennett.
Thank you. Looks like I've got the graveyard slot, so I hope there's some left by the time I finish. As Sheila said, my name's Kevin Bennett. I am a family man, a wife and 2 kids, 2 teenagers, one in college and one in school. Proud member of Unite the Union, and luckily enough I have a full-time job where I'm a workplace rep. So, but also I'm a Labour councillor, as you heard, in Warrington, and on Monday the 4th of March this year, at full council I voted against the cuts. But on Thursday the 4th of April, the Warrington Labour group suspended me indefinitely from the Labour group. I did have an appeal on the 2nd of July. They upheld the appeal and suspended me for 6 months from the date of the appeal. So effectively they've given me 9 months suspension from the Labour group. Basically, sorry, I need my notes here. Forgive me. So, what I wanted to say is that I do believe that I've tried to make an example of councillors, Labour councillors, and you know, to vote against the cuts. But what has happened is the Labour Party have tried to make an example of me simply because Unite the Union, I believe, were supporting me following the Falkirk debacle. And you know, and I must say that the people in Falkirk have been totally exonerated now, but they're still suspended from the Labour Party. Also, the GMB now have decided that they're going to reduce their affiliation, and they've gone from £1.2 billion down to £150,000, the money that they're giving to the Labour Party. And I think that Ed Miliband is sort of asking for that, and I think other unions will have to follow it if we go along with what Ed Miliband wants to do. Can I just say though, at this point, I have been fully supported by Unite the Union, and also other groups in Liverpool, the Wirral, Halton and Warrington, like the trades councils and other anti-cuts groups. So just would like to thank them all. And I would like to say that as a lad, I came to Liverpool to watch Liverpool Football Club play. I hope that's not too controversial, but I stopped going because I got threatened with a knife on Live Street Station. But since I've been coming to politics, my own colleagues have started stabbing me in the back anyway, so I don't know where to go from here really. Because since 2010, I've been into the whips 6 times, been dragged into the whips office 6 times. I've had accusations thrown at me. They've tried to intimidate me, bully me, simply for trying to put forward alternatives to the cuts. And you know, Unite's strategy is to fight the cuts, and I'm trying to implement Unite's strategy within the Labour group. But you know, they simply stopped me from talking now. They won't let, or they did do before they suspended me, they wouldn't let me talk within the Labour group. So I had to go along to the council meeting to vote against the cuts. At the moment we're scraping the bottom of the barrel. I think all councils, especially Labour councils, are scraping the bottom of the barrel. So how on earth are we going to maintain these levels of cuts? In Warrington we increased the council tax, and then we appear to be able to boost our reserves by millions. It just doesn't add up. And at the same time we're attacking jobs and services. What I believe is we should safeguard jobs and services by using reserves and borrowing. This would buy time for us to fight back against this Tory-led ideological coalition government. And Labour councillors everywhere, with the exception of a few in Southampton, Hull and others, are refusing to even consider this option. This government has pledged to cut around 730,000 public sector jobs and cut spending by £80 billion. Now, you would think that you know, having the burden of the universal credit, the bedroom tax, PIP payments, council tax benefits, the benefits cap, the discretionary social fund and legal aid cuts, that enough would be enough. And when it's a choice for our residents to choose between keeping warm and eating, and then you've got the added dignity of going along to food banks to feed the families, well, you know, I know whose side I'm on, and I think I know whose side everyone in this room's on. I was on BBC Radio Merseyside today, actually, on the morning show this morning, regarding the universal credit that's been rolled out in Warrington on the 29th of July. Now, from that, I mean, what initiated that was a report from the National Audit Office that said the universal credit, which is the government's flagship welfare reform, is in crisis after concluding that the system was overly ambitious and has not provided value for money for the taxpayer. No, that's not us saying that, that's a government body saying that. The report also added that £34 million out of the £303 million that they've paid has had to be written off. You know, that's spent on this technology so far. So it's just an absolute waste of money, as one of our colleagues said earlier. And new figures reveal that the level of jobless families is 3 times higher in the north than it is in the south. Glasgow has the highest percentage of workless households, with 30.2%, where no one over 16 is employed. Now, Liverpool is the second highest, which is 28.7%, and the national average is 18.1%. So, you know, what we've got to do as Labour councils and Labour councillors is we should be prioritising the needs, the people's needs, above the greed of the 1% of the richest in the country. It's, you know, when my Labour Council took control in 2011, we put dismiss and re-engage on the table. You know, terms and conditions have been stripped away. I fought along with my union colleagues and we got it taken off the table, but it's being ready to be considered again. And now my council have decided to give senior officers, directors of the council, between a 4.4% and a 13.3% rise, which is going to be voted on Monday in Warrington Borough Council. And we've got a lobby going on down there from 5 o'clock if anybody can make it, which means that our finance officer, director I should say, is going to get over £10,000 rise. And, you know, public sector pay workers are capped at 1%. And he's going to be telling us in the budget next year that we can't afford to, we've got to cut more, we've got to cut, we can't afford this, we can't afford that. It's absolute disgrace. I'll try and cut it short a little bit. You know, at one time we invested in the banks and the rail when they were failing. But what has this government done now? Society's failing, and they just want to pull the plug on us, on the most vulnerable, pushing them ever further into depression, drug abuse, family breakups, suicide, giving £30 billion tax breaks to the rich, while cutting welfare and tax credits by £30 billion. So what I've been trying to say is enough is enough. Labour councils are acting as agents of this coalition, and they need to stop burying their heads in the sand and start listening to the alternatives that we have got, credible alternatives. But this government just believes in the market. It just believes that the market will pull us out of the shit. Excuse my language. They want businesses to extract profit from public services, as you've heard, from schools, hospitals, welfare, and even prisons. Everything's going to be privatised. So it's people like you in here now to go to your Labour councillors, lobby your Labour councillors, and show them that they've got to vote against these cuts. What we've got to show is Labour councillors as well that if they do vote against the cuts, we'll support them. We're behind them. They've got somewhere to go. There's life after voting for the cuts, as I've proved. We need to be champions of the alternatives, and we need to send a strong message of defiance to this ideological, uncaring coalition government, and show them that we the people have got the guts to stand up to them. Now, I've told this to our other councils that there are other routes that are deemed to be an acceptable budget and will be decided not by the views of the council officers and their legal advisors, but will ultimately be decided by the growing public support against these cuts. So I'll cut it short there, and thank you very much for staying for so long. Thank you.
Because it does take guts to stand alone, but he's not standing alone, but he did stand out. Before everybody goes, for a few things, just announcement, a family fun day on Saturday the 14th of September at Wirral Advisory Centre in St Anne Street, Birkenhead. This Saturday is the Wigan Diggers Festival, obviously in Wigan. People have put a card from Hope Not Hate and would like you to fill it in, please. Don't limit our free speech against the lobbying, the thing to limit lobbying. The 29th of September is our big demonstration against the Tories, Sunday the 29th of September. There are coaches, free coaches from Liverpool. Please contact Unite or the TUC if you require coaches. And on the 1st of October, again at the Tory conference, a demonstration outside the Tory party conference to save our public transport. Please support that. And the 12th of October, here in Liverpool, a march against fascism. People are coming from all over the country to support this march, and I would ask that you do that. We asked for questions or subjects from people, and I realise that most people are going. If people, 4 have been pulled out of a hat or a box. If people are prepared to and want to speak for 2 minutes, I've got one from Mark Hoskinson, the subject being the importance of unifying. Mark, you got 2 minutes, do you want to speak?
Cheers. One of the things that's come out of this, and it's a fantastic meeting, but what Sheila's just said about the 29th, there's a question there that we have to address very quickly, which is how we translate things into practical action. Because how do we get people from Liverpool, all the people who were in this room, lots of them are going now, but all the people who are in this room, how do we get them to Manchester to make sure that that demonstration, what we have got to do through the People's Assembly, through Liverpool Against the Cuts, through Liverpool Trade Union Council, through the unions, we have to make sure that there's a real coordinated effort so that what Celia was talking about, the unions and the communities being brought together in struggle, is turned into a reality. And the second and final point I'd make in relation to that is the best way the trade unions can give real strength and confidence to the communities is by taking action themselves. Remember the miners' strike, remember the dockers' strike, when workers in trade unions stood up and fought for their rights. They drew the whole into those struggles. And we've seen examples just today. If you look at today, you had that specimen, Michael Gove, on the radio, on the television, looking every bit like a character out of the League of Gentlemen, you know, the ones that own the shops. He was there going, I condemn this strike action, I'm furious, this strike action panicked them. Strike action worries them. We've seen it with the PCS and the struggles they've waged. We've seen it with the rail workers. Just imagine this. If the TUC got off its behind and carried into life the resolution it passed last year to actually begin to organise a general strike against what is a general attack, then you'd be uniting the unions, the workers unemployed, employed, public and private, black and white. You'd be creating a mighty fist that could smash the face of Cameron and put his smile into the background for good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Is Roy Farah still here? Roy, is Roy Farah still here? No, well, I'll read it out because it is important. Is he here? No? Stop Royal Mail privatisation. And I think that is so important and something that needs to be supported. Jimmy Reid. Jimmy was essentially around and called for a general strike, which Mark has just referred to. Alex, let's stand up. Alex McFadden, before we go, we will be standing up. Alex, do you want to take the microphone? Thanks.
I just want to finish the meeting by, we've listened to a number of excellent speakers who had tremendous applause, but at the end of the day, if you want something done, you've got to do it yourself. So on the 29th of September, don't lie in bed, come out of your beds and join the demonstration. I just want to put my hat off to the organisation, the People's Assembly. The trade union movement is very proud of what it does, but we don't get turnouts like this, which is excellent, excellent. And just a farewell, if we could, to Kevin and his mate Steve, who are on the way to France. Tomorrow we're importing guillotines to deal with the Tories. Thank you.
Overwhelmed by the turnout. Let's translate this into action. If we stay isolated in our struggles, we'll lose. Collectively, we can win. We've got to stay together and fight together. And thank you once again for staying so long. Thank you. Please remember, any donations gratefully accepted. We're very poor. Thank you.